Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Colleen Hill, Curator of Costume and Accessories at the Museum at FIT and a member of FIT's Sustainability Council. I'm thrilled to be here today with Michelle Zhu and Kara Mack, who will be speaking to us about how we as consumers can look to innovative new ideas in the realm of materials to make more sustainable choices. I'll begin by introducing our panelists, but please note that we will be happy to take questions at the end. So if you do have anything you'd like to ask Michelle or Kara, please just leave those for us in the chat. Michelle Zhu is CEO and co-founder of HUUE, a biotechnology company creating the world's most sustainable dyes for the industries that are shaping the future of the Earth, starting with the indigo in your jeans. HUUE's mission is to minimize the amount of toxic chemicals used in the dye production and application process, which Michelle witnessed firsthand growing up with parents in the fashion industry. Michelle manages all aspects of HUUE's operations, fundraising, and business development efforts, complementing her co-founder Tammy's scientific background and development of the core technology. She holds a BSBA from Washington University in St. Louis and previously worked in both management and consulting and industry at the intersection of consumer products and technology. Michelle has been recognized as Forbes Under 30 in manufacturing and industry, as well as Inc.'s 100 leading female founders. Kara Mack studied fashion design at the Fashion Institute of Technology and spent her professional life as an apparel designer, specializing in knitwear for labels such as Ralph Lauren and Talbot's. As a train commuter, she went through 2 to 3 pairs of shoes each day, depending on the occasion. Kara had an idea to reduce footwear's environmental impact by reusing what one may already have and make it last longer, decreasing the number of shoes dumped in the landfill. Kara Mack Shoes was launched in 2015. The patented innovation introduces the world's first shoe line with instant heel-to-toe customization. It allows users to refashion their shoes from hundreds of different trendy, fun, and personalized options that she calls candy. This spring, we'll introduce a capsule collection of sandals constructed with chromium-free leather and wooden heels. It is the beginning of a project she has held deep in her mind for years, shoes that will be 100% recyclable and biodegradable. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to hear more about these really exciting projects. And as I was thinking about both of you and your companies and how your approaches to sustainable design and materials differ, where I started to see a lot of overlap was in the way that you're focused on wardrobe essentials. So as we just saw, heard in the bio, at the moment he was really focused on making a sustainable indigo dye for denim, which is of course one of the most desirable materials and also one of the most polluting historically. And Kara Mack's shoes is centered on classic silhouettes that can be easily updated for a variety of outfits. So could you each tell us a bit more about how and why you developed these ideas specifically, the indigo and then these kind of classic shoe shapes?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to get us started. So I will say, I don't think I can take, any glory for the invention of the original idea, and that's why I always make sure I have to mention that this is a labor of love started by two co-founders, with my co-founder Tammy sort of at the driving force of our technology, and she's our chief scientific officer today. So this project with HUUE to make cleaner sources of color via biology came from her PhD work at UC Berkeley, and so HUUE has kind of taken that technology and sort of spun it out into who we are today. But when Tammy was kind of first getting started, the origination of the project was really, this concept of, it was a classic kind of synthetic biology lab within Berkeley. And so they were programming and working with microbes, looking at sort of nature's inspiration and sort of using modern sort of bioengineering techniques to kind of mirror nature's process and work with nature's powerful manufacturers that are these microorganisms to create very interesting biochemicals. And so the particular project that Tammy was working on was mirroring the process within the Japanese indigo plant for creating indigo color for denim, and very quickly realized the enormous amount of kind of industry interest and impact that this technology solution could have. And so the way that we had gotten started was actually that, my husband was also a bioengineer in the same lab. And so among, all of the different types of synthetic biology applications that, we could be working on together, it was Tammy's that was the most interesting to me, simply because, as Colleen kind of mentioned in the bio as well, I came from that kind of background in the apparel space through my family's business. And so I also, I think, just sort of, viscerally and instinctively knew, what a great impact this kind of technology could be. So it's been so much fun just being able to bring this sort of a novel technology that is very much kind of growing and shaping the future of materials for kind of fashion and beyond, and bring it into the traditional kind of textile industry space.
Thank you.
You want me to go now?
Sure.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to be putting me in the same panel as these two powerhouses. I mean, Colleen and the museum at FIT, and Michelle, I bow down to you because I don't have an ounce of scientific knowledge in my little brain, but I do know what I like. One of those things is footwear, is shoes, but I realized over the years I was owning and wearing and throwing away way too many. So after 9/11, when I moved out of New York City, I started commuting, and this was later in my commute, maybe about 2011, 12, I had a pair of commuting shoes, and it was never sneakers, not in 2011 or 12. It was a nice pair of some sort of a ballet shoe. I'd go into Grand Central, had a 20-minute walk to my desk, my office, and I was greeted by about a dozen pair of shoes under my desk. And I knew that I was not the only woman in the world who went through this. And then I would decide, okay, which one goes with my outfit today? If I had an event that night, which was quite often, I had another pair of shoes and my shoulder bag, along with maybe my lunch and a laptop and, other things that gave me shoulder issues from schlepping things back and forth. And it just occurred to me one day that I think there must be a designer out there who has done a shoe of some sort where you could redress it as opposed to changing it constantly. Because I also took those 2 to 3 day business trips where you do not want to check your bag. But when you have a pair of shoes to match every outfit in your bag, you're checking your bag. So that's really where it started. And then I started chasing women through Grand Central if I saw shoes that I liked, and asking them where they got them. And I'd sit in the aisle of the train and watch every foot that went by me, female feet only, and sketch, and started buying these crazy chemicals and Googling how to mold and cast. And so I basically would get home late at night, pull all these chemicals out, and my kitchen counter was my lab. So that's what I did every night and weekend. I said, I think I have something here. I'm going to work on it until I felt comfortable enough hiring an engineer to put it into a 3D print. And this was the heel invention. So it was a shoe that had a permanent heel. I will just give you an example. So here, this happens to be one of our boots. So it's made in a shoe factory, just like any other shoe. The heel's not coming off. It doesn't go from low to high, but you simply remove the cover and you can, swap it around like that. So this expanded into sandals and shoes, and the straps change, the toe clips change. And here we are in 2022, survived that nasty COVID. Did have to close my store, but now moving into a very sustainable category.
Yeah, which is really exciting. So it sounds like both of you really came from a place where you identified a gap in the market. Because I know, for example, we rely so much on synthetic indigo dye because denim is such an incredibly popular material. I mean, whom among us doesn't wear something made from indigo denim in a week? It's kind of rare. And I love, Kara, that you were really thinking ergonomically, really, because as you kind of mentioned, there have been these ideas of shoes and footwear with heels that are interchangeable, meaning you can take them off. And I think there's been so many technical issues with that, and also ergonomic issues, because going from low to high kind of does require a different shoe last. So I really like how you approached finding something that was both sustainable, but also like really, you found a real need in the market, which is fantastic. But kind of related to that, I think it's so interesting that even though we all can recognize that sustainable materials are important, and I think increasingly important, it's obviously much more of a challenge to launch a business that focuses on sustainability rather than on something more traditional. If you're looking to make money or looking to start a fashion related business, it's obviously a more straightforward route to do something that doesn't necessarily think about sustainability in its model. So I think it's pretty evident that that means sustainability has to be a personal passion as much as a professional one. And I'm wondering if you agree with that, and if you can both give us a sense of what drew you to building a more mindful business specifically, kind of making it harder on yourselves in some ways, to be honest.
Kara, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. So I do live my life the way I run my business, which is as sustainable as possible. I mean, we're at FIT, right? I don't spend a lot of money on clothes. I used to, but I'm a rent the runway girl. I rent my clothes, I wear them. I was just away for 10 days. And then I came home and I shipped them back and got a few more things. And I make sure that everybody in my family separates the plastics and the boxes and the garbage. We try not to do so much laundry. There's just little tiny things that you can bring home with you. Now with the price of gas, we try to use the cars less and do more things when we're out there. Just small things like that.
Yeah. Well, I'll say, yeah, I mean, I agree with Kara that, I think it does have to come for, like, the personal passion piece is so important, because as we all know, building a business is so incredibly difficult. And so if you don't have that sort of personal drive behind the mission of like what you're doing, you're not going to make it. You're not going to be able to have the resilience to do all of the hard things that come with kind of building a business. But I will also say that I'm not sure that I fully agree that, that building a sustainability kind of oriented company needs to be harder. In fact, I do very much believe in sort of the future as using a mission, or the mission part of the company to drive advantage for the company. And so what I mean is, I think about sustainability as very much being table stakes, whether we're talking about sort of for the brands and the supply chains that HUUE is serving in the kind of denim manufacturing space, or for kind of companies ourselves, right? Every company that's kind of coming out at this point is needing to make sure that they have, sustainability is sort of top of mind in terms of like building a new company that's sort of future oriented and future protected. And so I do think that it is, we're just sort of more and more coming to a reality where, sustainability is future proofing your company. And so it's sort of like, it's good for the planet and good for business. And I think that there is an opportunity to use the mission for for just improving operations. So we talked a little bit about maybe that means sort of increasing customer sales, but also I think it means how you hire and recruit and motivate people too. I think most of, if not all of the employees and the team that we've recruited, if you ask every single one of them, I think the mission is at the heart of kind of why they join us. And similarly, when we think about sort of the collective, the investors that we've brought on board, the kind of storytelling we've been able to generate, even, in the press, I think that it all comes down to kind of sustainability being at the heart of everything that we're doing. And so I think we've been able to find a way to actually turn it into an advantage. And it's not, and it's not a kind of like greenwashing type of advantage either. It's more about this is at the heart and soul of what we're doing. And so, it therefore extends into all areas of our operations.
I love that. And I feel like that really positive mindset is something that I've heard a lot today. And that makes me really happy because, to be honest, when I started becoming really interested in sustainability and particularly sustainable fashion more than 10 years ago now, it was much more of a struggle. I mean, it was definitely more difficult, and you had to a lot of brands or manufacturers, I think, kind of almost had to defend their choices in a way that I think has shifted really significantly. So I love that now it's actually having to defend yourself on the opposite end of the spectrum. If you're not building sustainability into your brand, that's a much bigger problem. And also, I love your comment, Kara, because I think one of the things that we thought about a lot when planning this conference was that, of course, we're hoping that a lot of students and faculty, as well as the general public, will watch these panels. And we're all about making sure that people recognize that every step counts, every action counts, and every time you're thinking about, separating the paper from the glass, etc., that is an action, and it's an important one. And whether it's individual or whether you're building a company on those ideas, all of this is, our sort of call to action. So I'm glad that you so nicely summarized some of our points since we're at the end of day one.
Good, good.
So obviously launching a new business, and both of your businesses are relatively young, that must be so complex and varied, but I'm wondering if you can maybe walk us through some of the basic steps that it took to get started, or if that's just too much to tackle in this chat.
No. Well, I think I'll jump in here, Michelle, because I had years that I had to go through proof of concept, traveling the country, putting my footwear on women's feet, selling them at below cost to literally get feedback that they work, that they're comfortable, that the heel covers don't fall off, that the sandal straps don't fall off, that when they're traveling and they're bringing a bag of candy, which is what we call the accessories, and they're on vacation and they're changing them, there's not going to be a mishap with their footwear. So, and it also started with a low heel. So the whole collection started with this low heel on 3 different shoes. So the idea was this heel is now going to fit on this boot, as well as, the smoking hot slipper. So if you owned more than one pair, you could reuse what you already own. It took a while to come up with heel number 2, which was the block heel. And then there were 3 styles that worked back and forth on. Then there was the sandal strap, which is removable. So I can simply take this off and repurpose it. And then we came up with a second heel for that, so that the straps that go on this shoe also, it's upside down, also work on this shoe. So it was more than just a simple idea of making a shoe collection. It all had to be tested and proven before we could really expand. And then the third one, I actually did a 3.5 spike, which I'm pulling off out of the market because no one's wearing high heels really. And then our last one was the flared heel, which I had a sandal built around and a pump, and then COVID hit, and I really couldn't, move forward at that time. So it was not as cut and dry as, here, I'm starting a shoe company and here's my collection. It was a build. It was a good 4-year build before I could say, now I have a collection. And getting that proof of concept and getting those early adopters who turned into repeat customers, who shared that with their girlfriends, who were like, you would not believe I just went to Europe for 3 weeks and I brought a carry-on suitcase because I only brought 2 pair of Caramac shoes and a bunch of candy. And that makes my day. That makes me really excited. And I love when, people write in and say, these are the most comfortable shoes, or I just went to Bangkok and, I only bought your 2 sandals. That's a bit of a high. So I'm glad I went through. It was painful, but it was worth it. It was definitely worth it.
Yeah, I really appreciate Kara's comments, because I think it's so important. And maybe this is taking your question in a different direction, Colleen. So apologies about that. I'm happy to talk to anybody about sort of the legal piece of going through, right, establishing yourself as a Delaware C Corp so you can get, investors and all of those sorts of things. But I tend to think, yeah, that stuff isn't as much of a challenge, in terms of the basic steps, as much as just sort of the first stages of building a company from nothing to something. And I so appreciate kind of Colleen's story or Kara's stories about sort of going through various prototyping and kind of iteration. I will say, I think one of the things that I probably regret the most in terms of my early days of forming the company was that I had put so much pressure on myself. And this is probably because I came from this sort of major corporate world where, it's, revenues, operations, it's all about sort of, maximum efficiency. I put so much pressure on myself early that as soon as we are a company, we need to be a company. Everything is serious. Everything is, I want immediate results and now. And I just have so much appreciation, especially now, kind of looking back on the journey, right? And just being in a deep tech space where even if you've done years of lab development in a university, there's still so much more to do in terms of prototyping and R&D and product expansion. You got to do the whole thing over again when you're starting to expand into the sort of broader rainbow as well. So, I actually think it's really, really important to just make sure that the journey is fun. And especially in the early days, being okay with letting the idea simmer and building inspiration and going through iteration and just sort of enjoying that early process to make it a kind of small baby steps journey towards actually kind of launching and growing. And then, I don't know, I think, many people hopefully will be kind of surprised to find, you look up and suddenly 3 years has, gone by and the company is so much bigger than, where you expected it to be.
I love that. And it reminds me that one of our young speakers earlier, I think very astutely, was saying that she's essentially not interested in burnout culture. She was saying, I want to be able to step back and really think about what I'm doing and not get caught up in this idea that I have to meet all of these milestones immediately, but instead, like you were saying, kind of enjoy the process and enjoy what you're doing. So again, I think this is a shift that we're seeing in the way that younger businesses are working. And I think thinking about how the people working at these companies are feeling is certainly part of sustainability. Thinking about your staff and making sure that their wellness is at the forefront, whether it's, you know, the CEO or anyone else. All of these things
But
are
also
very important.
like the factory workers. I
Yep,
mean, that means a lot to me.
absolutely.
I
And
think
it's, yeah,
knowing that you're working with a factory who are the owner or whoever is running it is fair and ethical, that there is no child labor, that they're not working, you know, 17 hours a day, that they get paid a fair wage. Other than the factory I worked with during COVID, I've always visited all my factories, even when I was in apparel. I was going around the world 4 times a year. I'm talking Pakistan and Turkey and like the inners, the you know, places that you wouldn't even go to right now to be safe. But it was so important when I was looking for a manufacturer from day one that I was making the right decision and going in to the right areas. And I still love to tell the story that I met my agents on LinkedIn because they had worked for American footwear brands for between 14 and 20 years. And I sent them shoes to develop, and I said, don't put any heels on them. And they thought I was nuts. But I was not ready to divulge my invention had I not believed that the quality was up to par. So it did take a lot of back and forth. And they were like, you know, this girl from New York is a bit crazy. And we built such a wonderful, wonderful relationship over the years.
it's fantastic. And I think I told you when we spoke briefly last week, Kara, that I just love the idea of just making stuff happen, like being bold enough to find someone on LinkedIn and just
And then I
see
got
what
on a
happens. Bold and smart.
in Brazil, met these two perfect strangers, went to about 25 factories in 1 week, and 6 weeks later, 750 pairs of shoes arrived at my house. I mean, I was like,
Amazing.
bring them on.
And they were good.
If I had waited, it would have never happened. Sometimes you just have to pull the trigger.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think we're all feeling that after this pause of a couple of years too.
It's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I know both of you have mentioned in some capacity that you have long-standing connections to the fashion industry. So I'm wondering, with those connections, and I think we brought this up a little bit, but I'd love to know more directly what you were most surprised by or challenged by when you were building your current companies.
Why don't you jump on
Yeah.
that, Michelle?
Well, so yeah, so we, you know, as part of HUUE's business model, we work directly with brands and their supply chains to integrate our dye solutions into the fabrics and clothes that we're using and wearing every day. I would say, you know, and this is maybe kind of related to the question about sort of, you know, how everybody thinks about sustainability too, right? Back to the theme of sustainability as table stakes. I think one of the things that I was surprised about, and I would even venture to say, I think my parents were surprised about compared to when we, you know, were initially talking about the idea, is there is a true thirst and hunger today from the fashion industry to find solutions. I do think that brands and their supply chains truly want to change for the better. You know, and they want to kind of adopt these better materials. I think, you know, and that is a paradigm shift, right? Relative to, let's call it just even like a couple decades ago when, you know, it could be, and I think this is what got us to this issue of fast fashion and et cetera in the first place, but, you know, all about costs, all about, you know, just sort of race to the bottom, you know, get the cheapest materials. Now there is truly that desire to kind of look for alternatives. The challenge has been making sure to help these brands and supply chains who are so used to the fast timelines, or let's say relatively fast sort of timelines and operations of fashion, to understand that these sorts of deep innovations, fundamental changes are not going to be immediate in terms of the rollout, the availability, the capacity, right? We are going, just as we talked about before, kind of step by step from lab scale, tiny quantities to a larger sort of proof of concept amount, to a larger sort of like first launch line, to then scaling up to larger launches and larger kind of, commercial releases to finally meet the sort of like full spectrum of the supply chain. That is what the journey needs to look like. And that is a multi-year, kind of journey. And so I think just sort of making sure to educate the industry about the time and partnership and patience, and I should call it, collaboration that is required to kind of bring these new models and these new materials to life, is extremely important.
Oh, I love that answer. I wouldn't have thought about that. So that's really interesting to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, and Michelle, you said one of my favorite words of the past 12 months, which is collaboration, because I think that in my past life, being an apparel designer in a very, very different world. Okay, so we're talking the late 80s. I'm dating myself, until the launch. So the late, like 2010, it was a different world. I remember my first, and this I think was so premature, it was a huge, probably $15,000 mistake. So I launched in December of 2014, which was really, 2015, and showed at the FN platform, which is the footwear version of Magic in Vegas, that following August, when nobody knew me. And was when I entered the hall, I had to walk 15 minutes to get to my booth. That's how far back I was. Like, nobody was coming to see Karamak shoes. And it got to the point where I realized our shoes look like any other shoe in a store. Nobody could tell that they're interchangeable. So we started demonstrating, or we had like a rolling video. So when people walked by, they could see that you could remove all the parts. So there was a department store buyer, I'm not going to mention where, but, in his full suit, and he had the whole team behind him. And when we demonstrated, his team, their eyes open like, wow, I see something here. And his response was, yeah, that's pretty cool, but I just want to sell shoes. And again, you were saying this before, Colleen, like timing is also very important, because when you introduce something new that the world doesn't know about, or your demographics have never seen before, you have to educate them, as much as, as much work as you're putting into building your business. Now you have to educate the consumer, because they've never seen this before. So it actually is a much bigger job than just, in my case, being a manufacturer, or, a designer and manufacturer. And also, to finish what your question was, I came from apparel, and I literally dropped it and went into footwear. And everyone's like, oh, well, you were already in the fashion industry. You know what? It was like starting from day one. I had no connections, buyers. I knew no footwear designers. I didn't know anything about leather. Like, it was starting from day one. So, I mean, I have no regrets, but I just want to let people know, like, just because you're in a fashion, the industry, the areas are very, very, very different. I mean, Michelle's in textiles, technically, right?
Yeah, I mean, even the supply chain, or the partners you might work with for denim are different, usually than, because it's such a specialized kind of operation compared to working into, other types of apparel.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Michelle, I'm going to ask you a more specific question, because one of the things that I loved when learning about HUUE is that I actually understood what you're doing to create your dyes, because I do not have a scientific mind. So I was really impressed that I could go to your website and follow the process, and you have already spoken really clearly about what that is in some way, but could you be a little bit more specific about your general process in creating your dyes, and kind of what they're made from and kind of how that got started?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know this is like a whole different, the theme of kind of like my job is really kind of trying to translate this like deep science, right? Kind of, foundational technology with the sort of like consumer and fashion oriented kind of audience. Um, so I guess a little bit about just the sort of existing processes of making dyes, right? Of course, thousands of years ago, we would get color from plants and animals. That was how you'd make it. But 100 years ago, the Germans basically invented, petrochemistry and figured out how to create color instead from petrochemicals. And that is the overwhelming majority of kind of how we do things today. It's an extremely carbon and toxic chemical intensive kind of process. And so as opposed to the petrochemical process, what the sort of advancements in this field of synthetic biology is allowing us to do is to finally go back to nature to create color. And so I talk about this theme of sort of drawing that inspiration from color, right? And so what that means is, much in the same way that Tammy was looking at the Japanese indigo plant, we look at, right, nature as the original artist. All of the areas, whether you're talking about beet red or flamingo pink, et cetera, or indigo blue, right? All of the places in nature where color exists, and we basically identify and sequence the enzymes that are responsible for creating those specific colors within the nature that's around us. And we will take that genetic information basically and program our own little microbes. It's to basically mirror that process and be able to kind of secrete and kind of biomanufacture, is what we call it, these dyes instead. And so the whole process is not involving tons and tons of heat, not involving tons and tons of chemicals. It's a sort of like brewing type of process in the kind of the same way that you might think about sort of brewing your beer. So once we encode that information into our microbes, what we can do is grow them up in these giant tanks like beer, and basically create these low carbon, non-toxic colors to be a drop-in replacement into the fashion industry and any of the other applications where we use color. Because if you really think about it too, color it's everywhere and infused into so many of the products that we're using and consuming every day.
I think that is so fascinating. And to a spin on that, that's where my chromium-free leather is going to be coming from. So that's vegetable dyed, which means they're not in the tannery drums filled with chemicals that will eventually get dumped into our soil. So I applaud everything you're, I remember, I think it was the early 80s. No, it had to be the early 90s. And I don't know if it was Conshohocken or one of the cotton companies, they were growing dyed cotton. So, I mean, they weren't really deep, rich colors. So they were more like, the red was more pink and the blue was baby blue. But how cool was that? Where the cotton was not white, it was blue and it was pink and it was yellow, and that's what they were spinning into knitwear yarn. So I think you've come such a long way, Michelle. I want them for my boots. I want that indigo dye for my boots.
Oh,
yeah, I love chatting with Kara because she's full of ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, I think, brands like Kara's are the future. And I think it is exactly because of, the growth of these brands and the incredible movements that they create for HUUE, our mission is to be an enabler for brands like Kara's, right, to kind of carry out their mission into the world and bring better, better products to consumers.
Kara, I'm going to go slightly off script. I hope that's okay, because when you mentioned something earlier about your sandals and packing, it reminded me of this really great story that someone told me about the designer Emmanuel Kahn. From some vacation she'd been on with Emmanuel in the south of France. And this woman said that she showed up for this beach holiday with 2 large suitcases, and Emmanuel Kahn showed up with a tiny duffel bag full of mix and match knits that she wore for like 2 weeks, just, switching it up. And she said she was the most chic person on the beach, and she's always kind of wanted to channel Emmanuel ever since. So it got me thinking about this idea of this sort of capsule wardrobe. And again, if you'd be interested in partnering with someone on that, I see your shoes as this kind of capsule wardrobe, and maybe how you could yeah, that's, I guess for both of you, kind of where do you see your brands going? What kind of further partnerships and collaborations do you see in the coming years?
Well, so I'm still bootstrapped. Okay. I've never taken seed money or VC money, and I kind of wanted to stay there. But what I am interested in, because it's very difficult for a small brand like mine to get the word out to the masses that you really want to get it out to, for the purposes of, saving the planet one shoe at a time, which is my, one of my little logo ideas. But I would love to license my patented heel technology to a major shoe company who can really do some damage in marketing, who could really get the masses to understand that this is the new way to shoe going forward. You don't need 10 pairs of boots every season. You may need 2, a low one and a high one, and you just change out your heels. You don't need a dozen pair of sandals every spring, maybe just a few. And they can design whatever they want. It's just that I own the patents, so they would technically be licensing them. And then, eventually I'd like to, grow my little company a little bit more and be able to offer maybe to the younger generations. I think the tweens, if the styling was correct, and little girls, like I actually made little girl heels. I had them 3D printed, and I bought a boot, a pump, and a sandal. And I have the samples where it actually took me 3 hours to get the darn heels off, because there was metal shanks and screws. But I got the heels off, and then I put mine on just so I could make a presentation. But there's only 5 major children's shoe companies in the country. So it's just getting, no pun intended, my foot in the door there to see it. Because I did a whole collection of, I'm not getting myself in trouble here, but just CADs of Disney, Hello Kitty, all the princess shoes, Wonder Woman. I mean, how empowering could that be for a little girl to have Wonder Woman shoes that you can change the kapow to wow and wham. Anyway, just that's my vision.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. And Michelle,
I love that
what
too.
about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, in terms of the next couple of years and our priorities, I would say, our main focus right now, right, is bringing this from a, primarily kind of R&D, right, piloting type of like company to full on commercialization and starting to get the very first pairs of jeans made with, HUUE Indigo out into the market. And that's just for our first product. And on the heels of that, that, also making sure that we're continuing to build upon the platform of taking color from nature to continue to expand the rainbow. So hopefully that looks like sort of more colors beyond, denim, but also even sort of more industries beyond fashion. So that's what we're really excited about sort of moving ahead. We think that there's a real clear kind of gap in the market right now where no consumers, no sort of regular people really know what are the companies behind the colors, in the products they're using every day. And we want to own that space. We want to be the company that people look for, the brand that people look for in their clothes or in their food, that that they can trust as a cleaner source of color. So.
Well, thank you both so much. I can't believe we've already gotten to 45 minutes because you're both so fascinating and fun. So it was really, really interesting and engaging, and I'm very proud to know you and have connected with you. So thank you so much.
Gosh,
Thanks so much for hosting us. I had so much fun.
I'm actually going to put my social media in the chat here if anybody's interested, which is so easy. It's Caramac Shoes. So that's for Facebook and Insta. And I see some really sweet notes that people wrote. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Thank you for hosting this, Colleen. And thank you for Karen Pearson for finding me and putting me in touch with my alma mater. I mean, it's been a long time and I can't wait to come visit in person again. And I want to shout out to my goddaughter, Ava, who just transferred to FIT from McGill. And I think she's watching. So
Lovely.
bye.
Well, thank you, ladies. Let's please keep in touch.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.